I hope that everyone's feeling awake and ready for our next discussion panel. But before we get to that, we have the lovely Miss Bokholo Kenewando, the African Director at UN Climate Change High-Level Champions Team, giving a presentation for the African Carbon Market Initiative. Please let's give her a warm welcome to the stage.
Thank you. A very good afternoon to you all. Thank you to those that could join us briefly after the tea break. I know it's very difficult to disengage from all the networking that's happening outside and come and sit through carbon markets conversation. But I promise you that I'm going to do my best to make it as interesting as possible so that we can learn a little bit about what it is that we're doing in the continent and how it can be relevant for the Arab world. So as has been introduced, my name is Bokholo Joy Kenewando, and I am a special advisor to the UN High-Level Climate Champions, Africa Director, and one of the co-founders and steer co-members of the Africa Carbon Markets Initiatives. The way we have been thinking about the African Carbon Market Initiative, it really was thinking about how the world is increasingly recognizing the importance and the urgent imperative to act on climate action, on climate change, and that it is necessary that we be moving away from viewing climate change from just solely a scientific perspective and recognize the interlinkages to sustainable development. So when we launched the African Carbon Markets Initiative last year at COP27, we were thinking about how it is that the world's leading economies are already investing in new technologies and other measures to not only lower their emissions, but to build a competitive advantage in a green future. And we're thinking about how exactly do we position the African continent within this very evolving global trend. And while these trends are very encouraging, we were noticing that only a subset of those wealthiest markets are benefiting from the growth of climate finance and are working towards net zero by 2050. So we thought about how it is that many of our large developing economies and countries that account for very little of emissions could potentially benefit from the growing climate finance and could help to lead in a green development pathway. So that is the background for how we thought about the African Carbon Markets Initiative. So we thought that, of course, for humanity to collectively achieve an aggregate net zero by 2050, it is crucial that we limit, yes, the worst effects of climate change. Then it will be necessary for some parts of the world to remove substantially more greenhouse gases from the atmosphere than they emit and to make up for the shortfall elsewhere. So Africa, with its relatively low emissions, existing emissions, large endowment of land and key natural assets, a youthful population, and a vast untapped renewable energy potential, certainly has a potential to be a key player in balancing out the world's carbon accounts. So when we thought about the African Carbon Markets Initiative, we came together as partners, the UN High-Level Climate Champions, the UN UNECA, the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, and Sustainable Energy for All as the partners for this. And we have set up a steerco that will help us in delivering on our mandate. So as I mentioned, Africa aspires, of course, to be a lead within the carbon market space. And I won't go into breaking down the definitions because our panel right after me will be able to do that. But we were thinking that today we are looking at just 22 million metric tons of carbon that are retired. And we have an ambition, of course, for 2030 and 2050. But at the base of our ambitions is to ensure equitable and transparent distribution of carbon credit revenues and to make sure that there's a significant portion that is benefited to communities. So the market summary at this moment, there is quite a bit of activity in the continent. Most of the African carbon credits at the moment are accredited or verified by Verra. There is participation of Gold Standard and others in the continent. But what we're seeing is that there is supply, significant supply, and at the moment it's mainly nature, and I will show that in the next slide. There are some top buyers, large corporates that are performing and trading within the continent at the moment. But what we're seeing is these buyers purchased only about 26% of African credits that were retired by 2021. So when we think about the voluntary carbon markets in the continent, the first credit, we believe, that is recorded was traded in 2010. And we have seen some growth, though not exponential and not at the same rate as for the rest of the world, between 2016 and 2021. So we're looking at a plus 36% growth between the period. So 2017 was marked by a large carbon credit issuance in the continent. And we anticipate, or we hope that through the African Carbon Markets Initiative, we will see a doubling effect of these figures. So there are many types of carbon credit projects that are applicable in the continent. We have those avoidance offsets, removal of offsets, and then we have some of those that are still nascent and opportunities for carbon markets within the continent. So at the moment, a lot of the projects that are under development are under renewable energy, some household devices, and here we're speaking of opportunities in clean cooking. There's some transport, there's industry gases, waste management, and one of large interest in the continent at the moment is around nature. So based on agriculture and soil sequestration, some afforestation and reforestation projects, similarly with blue carbon and some seaweed farms that we're seeing some growth of in the continent. So only about 5 countries at the moment account for approximately 65% of carbon credit issuances in the continent. And over 70% of the projects are forestry and land use, as I have mentioned earlier. So we're seeing that only about 11 or so percent of projects fall under renewable energy projects, and 27 for household devices. And there has been a substantial push in clean cooking projects. While the very contentious yet fast-growing space of forestry and land use has accounted for over 70%, there are still serious issues that need to be tackled under this particular category. And some of these challenges that we must deal with is MRV around standing forests and standing nature assets. Of course, what does it mean for additionality for those countries that are custodians of the Congo Basin and the Okavango peatlands? And we have to think about, of course, the limited number of project developers, and if the current MRV system allows for entry, are there high barriers to entry for new developers? And then we have to think about the fragmented access, which I hope surely that our panel discussion will be able to deal with. There's a very strong issue around the distrust of projects based around REDD+ and those opportunities that we really do need to deal with and seek solutions for. And then when it comes to intermediation and financing, which is one of the key issues why we started the African Carbon Markets Initiative, was to unlock financing for African countries and for project owners. So here we're thinking now that there are high intermediation costs that need to be dealt with. We need to look at standardizing processes and for assessing credit co-benefits, and really think about how exactly it is that we develop the financial markets around carbon markets, particularly in the continent. And then lastly, there have been issues that we've dealt with of concerns of integrity. What does it mean to have a good quality credit? And how can we assure integrity of both the supply side and the buyers? This was a question that has been overly posed by some of our partners and those that are looking to buy African credits. So we will be posing this question similarly during the panel. What does it mean to have quality credit, and what does integrity mean? So where we stand at this moment is we have taken those many questions and several challenges that we know are being faced within the carbon market space in the continent and grouped them into 13 action program areas that need to be addressed. And these are, how do we create an enabling environment? And as such, item 1 is the country voluntary and carbon market activation plans. Governments need to be aware of what exactly it is that they need to do to enable carbon markets within the continent. How do we scale project developers and suppliers, facilitate them through accelerators and others? And 3, the scale of micro carbon credits involving smallholder farmers. We need to think about that. The majority of the continent's economies is based on informal sector, small scale farmers. So how do we bring them on board the system? And 4, we need to build additional capacity for monitoring, reporting, verification, and validation, which is a point that I mentioned quite often earlier, that MRV is one of our major concerns. And 5, support African exchanges and marketplaces. How do we then deploy financing mechanisms to de-risk investments? And we know that this is a challenge, particularly in carbon markets. And how do we secure advanced market commitments with large corporates? We've seen this, and I will show it in the last slide, and ensure integrity and quality of African credits while establishing African carbon neutral commodities, and lastly, build demand for African carbon credits. One of the things that we've really been thinking about is, over and above just the carbon markets and carbon credits, is there an opportunity for differentiated products that can provide differentiated pricing and therefore revenue to drive towards the continent? So where we were at COP27, by the time we launched, and the launch happened in the presence of about 6 African presidents, with high level of political commitment in the continent. We launched with about $200 million that was committed to the advanced market commitments, and 8 countries that had signed up for country activation plans. And of course, as I mentioned, we had some high level participation. But we also had another event that looked at exactly the kind of innovative projects that we would like to support within the continent. Has stopped moving. So next, please. Thank you. So interest in African Carbon Markets Initiative is growing. We've seen 7 additional buyers come on board, no specific purchase commitment. We've seen 7 more countries in discussion for country activations, and 5 governments and philanthropies also come on board considering funding or supporting ACME's delivery of the roadmap. So where we stand, we are facilitating the Kenyan government with their country activation plans. Our team will be in Malawi this week, and we will be in Gabon and Sierra Leone within the next coming months in order to jumpstart this process. So we have big goals for COP28. We want to get $1 billion worth of commitments to purchase African carbon credits. And we want to add approximately 5 African countries in developing their carbon market activation plans. We want over 50 partners to be part of the ACME roadmap. We want support suppliers growth. We want to be able to capture approximately 3 million metric tons per year. And then we want to make sure that we are developing at least 2 projects from inception, those that are still within the nascent methodologies. There's a strong conversation around biodiversity credits, but I don't want to launch it in this meeting today, but that is still something that we are considering. So we have had several events to date. Again, we only launched in November at COP27, but we have hosted a session for project developers, a roundtable, and these are some of the outcomes. And then lastly, to give you an example of the projects that are currently under ACME, we have the Blue Carbon Accelerator Fund, the mangrove restoration projects in Nigeria, the conservation of forests in the Komifak area, and the Northern Kenya rangeland projects. There is a lot of activity happening in Kenya, and I'm hoping that Reham will talk about that as well during our panel. I want to lastly encourage you all to join us in this very critical project. It is not our own. It is one that works to ensure that we are working on the disparities that exist within the global green financial infrastructure, and that we are able to close the gap that exists within the carbon market space. So we're looking for partners that will be able to join within the thematic working groups and to help us in delivering the action program of ACME. We're particularly looking for those with big wallets that can come and invest in the continent, because the opportunities are great. And of course, the lack of action in climate action will be dire. The opportunity cost is very high, and we look to all of you for great and effective participation towards our common goals for 2030. Thank you very much.